This is the Balanced Advisor Podcast with Dr. Travis Perry, helping financial advisors like you achieve balance in their lives.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor Podcast. I'm Travis Perry, and with me in studio, I have Andres Mazabel with Trust and Will. Andres is a former private banker at JP Morgan, who is now helping solve the fact that 60% of families don't have an estate plan. Trust and Will is helping financial advisors be more proactive with estate planning through a comprehensive approach. And I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Travis. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so you're there in sunny California, but that is not your origin. Tell us about your origin story, my friend, and how you got to United States, but also how you got into business doing Trust and Will.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been super grateful to call San Diego home for about 22 years, but we actually was born and raised in Colombia, down in South America. And my aunt has been living here in the United States for about 30 years. And she, back in the 90s, where Colombia was just very unstable, my parents made the decision to say, we want a better future for our kids. And they made the leap of faith, and here we are. And very grateful to call San Diego in the United States home for sure. And gosh, Trust and Will, I spent, as you mentioned in the intro, roughly about 13 years in private banking. And it was super unique how kind of, that journey started. Going through college, I was working part-time as a teller. I graduated and then got licensed, got my 766. And then I looked back, I was like, man, I've been doing this for 13 years. And I became really passionate around helping families achieve their goals. So I've always worked super closely with advisors. I know exactly the hurdles that they face. What are they looking to, and how do they really look to add value, right? And I turned 30 at the time, and I was like, okay, great. I can easily stay at JP Morgan for 30, 40 years, call it a career, but there was something inside of me that wanted something else. I wanted to step outside my comfort zone. I wanted to test out a different industry. So there was about a year gap where I was trying to find something that really aligned with what I'm passionate about. And I've been so fortunate. I've been at Trust and Will now for about a year and a half. And as you mentioned, that's, financial advisors are always looking at ways to add value and deepen relationships. And estate planning has typically been a big missing link, right? And how can an advisor add a little bit more value, deepen relationships? So I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more, but that's essentially our mission with myself and my team is to enable advisors to be more proactive when it comes to estate planning. Because I really think today, most consumers aren't going to an advisor to say, Travis, I'm looking for XYZ return. Because you can find that online. It's easier than ever for you to find investments that are low cost. You can set up online and it's very easy. But I think consumers are just looking more and more for a really comprehensive, holistic approach that helps really align what are their goals and how can we get you there step by step.
Yeah, I think you really mention this and you reiterate this, like advisors are relationship people, right? That's why they come to you, and you're, helping to create that with Trust and Will. And I appreciate that. And we will get more into how you help advisors with that later through the podcast. But this is so important because when I met your company and I started learning about you, I'm like, goodness, this guy needs to be on the podcast. We need to understand how, this fits in with comprehensive financial planning. Because I remember being a financial advisor going, okay, recommendations. It was like standard protocol, get a Trust and Will, like every single time. And it was usually like number 1 or 2 on my list of recommendations because most of the time nobody had it. And I'd give them a list of, attorneys to go to. But it just seemed like unless I held their hand, they would never get it done. Like I literally took a client because he was such a high net worth client downstairs to the attorney, sat there and made sure that the will, was drafted, but most importantly, the trust was built the right way. and walked him through the whole step-by-step process because I wanted to make sure it got done.
Totally.
And yet what you're doing is essentially offering that through technology. And I love it. So we're going to get to that a little bit more in a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's that just brought me back to when I would have those conversations with my clients. And see, most of the times there's a lot of barriers into the traditional estate planning industry. For most people that don't have very complex needs, it's very expensive for you to go talk to an attorney. For whatever reason, some families just find it intimidating of like, we're going to go to the attorney's office. We don't really know how much it's going to cost. What are we going to talk about? So what we found is like, if we provide families like an alternative that's still creating obviously really high quality state specific documents, families will be more proactive to actually get it done. So, think of it more of like a TurboTax like model, but for estate planning for people without complex needs. So, I can totally relate to some of the pain points that you just mentioned in terms of, hey, here's the attorney, you need an estate plan, but there's that blocker. There's that blocker of people not taking the next step, calling the attorney, setting up the meeting. So it's a problem we're very passionate about to really help solve.
I love that. Well, that's great. Well, I want to get into how, this affects advisors with their balance. So first off, just kind of throwing this back in here on the conversation about balance. What is your definition of balance?
That's a great question. When I think of balance, I really think of what is important to you, and are you setting up your life really in a way that aligns with what's important to you. So for me, family, being outdoors, so hiking, camping, and then really taking care of myself. Like an hour a day of exercise for me, almost 5 days a week, is where balance really comes into play for me. So understanding, and there's days that, I know I have so much to do, but at the end of the day, it's like, I can only do so much. And then I put myself first instead of putting my job first, right? Because I know that if I get burnt out, I'm not going to show up in the best way for myself, my team, and the people that we serve. So it's a skill to learn. And I do want to commend you for this, Travis. I mean, I've been working in this industry for a while. There's a ton of folks that help advisors with marketing, lead generation, all that. But this is such an important factor that I've seen advisors just really get burnt down on. So I just want to commend you for that. I think it's something that's really impactful, not just to the advisor, but think about their families, their clients, like all the people around them. So really impactful work that you're doing.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's so true what you said about, getting out and exercising an hour a day. And for you, that's a big thing, right? And being with family, being outdoors. It's so interesting. If I was to ask this a different way, I'd say, hey, paint a picture of what balance looks like. Most people, I think, that I've done this podcast with, it would be outside. It would be doing something like just relaxing. And that's what we tend to think of, right? Is like this balance. Yet it tends to be like the last thing on our list to do if we don't prioritize it. And I love that you mentioned priorities and, what's important to you, really finding that out. And for me, I don't make a list of what's balance for you or every other advisor, but really it's what is it that's super important to you? What are your values? What are your priorities? And make that your focus, because you're right. Because otherwise you hit burnout. And I'm sure that, as you've been in the industry at JP Morgan, really as a banker / advisor, maybe not an advisor role, but in a private banker role, which is very, very similar, right? You're dealing with clients and their relationships. But what have you seen as an issue for most other advisors that are struggling with finding their balance?
I think it really comes in, from my experience, specifically your first 3 to 5 years, because that's when you're really trying to build that book of business, to launch the business. There's so many, especially, and I have the utmost respect for independents, for RAs, because this is the salesperson, you're the marketing. I mean, you're doing most everything on your own, especially when you're starting, right? And man, that's the biggest thing. It's how can you prioritize, but at the same time, understand that everything that you're doing, you're not going to get the results that you might want right away, that it's a process that you have to do, right? And people like, when I was an advisor at JP Morgan, I was working with an advisor here in San Diego who was one of the most successful here in Southern California. And I would look at his calendar. The man barely had time to go to the bathroom. I mean, he was booked Monday through Friday, like 8 hours, because obviously, 9 to 6 is when the bank is actually open. And there were times where I saw because I was in the meetings almost most of the time with him, and I could see just like the energy from like the mornings to like the afternoons, just like really affect him. And I said, Matt, like there's a time that like we really have to like block out time for us to like recap, add notes, take breaks, take lunches. And we started implementing that a little bit more, and like taking control of our calendar and not having the calendar control our day. And we saw a huge impact. And it's something that, I talk to my team almost daily. We need to make sure that we're controlling our time. We can't let our calendar control our time, because then there's the days that it's like, gosh, you feel like you had a crazy busy day, but you're just exhausted towards the end of the day, where you might feel like you did a lot, but were you really as productive as you could be? So that's something that I think I've learned and I've seen through the years, that I try as hard as I can to really implement in my own life, and how I kind of manage and prioritize my schedule as well.
Love that. You literally just like hit my social media post and posting tomorrow. This is going to air a lot later, but I literally finished that before we got on air here this morning, about taking lunch. Like you mentioned, like take breaks, like eat lunch. This is one of the biggest symptoms I find for workaholics. They don't eat lunch, or they're eating lunch at their desk because they can't seem to take a break, walk around, get a drink. I work from home, so it's a different story, but I still have to have boundaries here, because otherwise, it's easy to just like do home stuff or fix the house or run errands. Like you still have to be very, very balanced at home, and maybe even more so, right? I know you've got a home office as well, and it has changed everything. But I've been doing this for 12 years, and this is old hat for me. But for a lot of advisors, especially through COVID and the shutdown, like they struggled with this because they didn't have a plan and they didn't know what to do. And so they get caught up with, well, what do they do now? Because now they're at a kitchen table and they're with their laptop and the kids are in the background. Like it just gets all hairy and confusing, but you need a break. So even for me, like, yeah, I'm working from home, but I leave the office, I go outside, I go for a walk. Sometimes I'll take my wife to lunch or my kid to lunch, like just take that break. And in that banking environment, yeah, I can imagine. And with advisors as well, it's like you're seeing people all day long, you've got to take breaks. So I really appreciate that. And you've seen that. Any other issues that you've seen, like obviously the overschedule, not creating enough break time in between, but any other things you've seen that advisors struggle with balance?
Gosh, what comes to mind for me there, it's really all around what are like your main priorities and how can you set up, especially specifically at JP Morgan, where everything is very paperwork heavy, right? Very compliant, all that good stuff. So it's just like, how can you set up your days and your weeks that really align with what are your top priorities that you really need to get done? And then what are things on the lower end? And mentally, it's how you can set it up in a way that just makes you the most productive, right? Like some people love early morning meetings, and then some others like them in the afternoon. So how can you learn about when do you have like the most output from a productivity perspective, and then trying to set up your days and your weeks around that. Because that's something that I saw a ton. It's like I have paperwork to do for this client, and then I have another new client meeting, and like doing blocks, like blocking off your calendar, I think is super powerful, because I think that's something that I saw a ton in the industry. Just advisors running with like their heads cut off, right? It's like off to the next thing, off to the next thing, and just really slowing down and just really taking control is super, super important.
That's great. Yeah. Time blocking is huge.
Yeah.
But it's got to be intentional. Like you said, like align that with your priorities. I feel like, yeah, this is exactly what we talk about in the book, about getting your priorities in order and then actually creating an ideal calendar that's built on your priorities, not something vice versa. So totally. You're nailing that one. Now, listen, you talk about your team and how you train your team. I know a lot of advisors, this is a struggle for them, is that they struggle to not only be balanced themselves, but then, show that as an example to their team. You sound like a really good example of that, as I've just picked up on. I teach my team to make sure they're not overscheduled, help them with time blocking, something we do at work. What would you suggest for those, like those independent RIAs, or even those life insurance agency managers, managing partners and directors and things, who have a team where it can easily get out of balance? Even let's say they were balanced before, but it can easily get out of balance because now they're in management. What would be a kernel of wisdom that you would share with them?
Something that I listened to a podcast from Michael Kitces earlier this year, and the man has 20 different things on his plate, right? I mean, the podcast, his actual, financial planning role, events, all that, and all the companies he's involved with. And something that I learned from him is he does themes for a specific day. And this is something that we've started to really look at and implement with my team. And it's how can we pick specific days that help you focus on one specific theme, right? So if that theme for an advisor is Mondays, we're going to make sure that we have, any paperwork, any ACATs, anything that's paperwork related, right? You do kind of a block there. And then you have, for example, like the RAs, the independents, or insurance, where it's very content driven, right? You have like this morning or this day that your mindset is focused on content creation. And that's what you're focused on. That's where your mission is for that day. And then you just set up your day or your weeks as best as you can to help you really focus on like one or two specific themes. And I found that for me, that's been helpful, because in my role, there's also a million things going on, and like how to grow and how to work with advisors better, et cetera, et cetera. And it can become overwhelming if you just plug in all these problems to solve in 5 days. So it's like, how can we just be more specific, pick a day or even half a day where you're focusing a little bit on that. And we found that that's been actually super helpful in terms of just being more productive with what you need to do.
Love that. So I interviewed Kitces back like in March when the whole shutdown was happening about my book. He interviewed me, and then I interviewed him, and he's interviewing me about balance. I'm like, Michael, you strike me as someone who's involved in a few things. I'd like to know, like, what are you doing? And it's funny because we got talking about this theme idea that you just mentioned. I cannot emphasize this more. Because I actually talk about it in the book, in Achieving Balance. And I talk about how, as we set up our ideal calendar, have in mind a theme. And I had one client who it was a breakthrough for him. He heard my interview on Kitces, and, it's something that Michael and I, we totally are in alignment with. But he heard my interview, and he started in the coaching program with me, and he started making Mondays his operation day. Yeah. And he's on my website now saying, I just changed like one day and made that my operations day where I could just focus on all the stuff. I meet with my team. I do everything. I get it all set up. He's like, it's changed my entire life. So I really appreciate you bringing this up, because this is something where psychologically there is something to thinking, oh, today's Saturday. I don't work. Like, I'm going to go play, or I'm going to hang out with the family. Or if it's like repair the home day or mow the lawn or whatever you do, go to tournaments with your kids. Like, it is a different day. And yet why don't we do that each day at work, so that we can be more, present, or at least enjoy it. Right. I hear there's enjoyability here. So I love that, man.
Yeah. And Travis, I have a question for you. In your experience with the pandemic and many advisors working from home, have you seen that advisors feel like they're working a lot more because they're working from home?
Yeah, I see advisors there was I'll tell you, there's kind of like an initial shift. Everyone that I was interviewing, so I've interviewed almost 200 advisors now, or advisors to advisors, about this. And what I saw was this beginning of like, oh no, what are we going to do? We all go home, right? And then everybody bought their home stuff and got their home office set up. And there was that initial kind of hump where maybe a month or two, we're all kind of like, what are we doing here, right? Trying to figure it out. And then it was during that time period that a lot of advisors lost the balance that they had before. So even if they were balanced, it's like, oh man, everything's out of balance. And some of them recovered because they're smart and they got some things figured out. They recovered and they created a schedule, but it took them a while. Where others, and I would say the majority, it made it worse. It kind of exacerbated an already sleeping giant, right? Like, it just made it, this sleeping bear, sleeping giant, whatever, just kind of woke up to, oh man, my life is even way out of balance. And because they were stressed, most workaholics will actually work more. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't supposed to make sense, but you follow the logic here. And it's because when you're stressed, you try to go to the thing that you can control the most. And for a lot of advisors, it's work. Well, I can control work, so I'm going to get in, I'm going to work harder, and I need to be there for my clients. It's the justification that leads to what I call the workaholic trap. So I felt like this was the best time, honestly, to launch the book and to research and interview advisors, because I could see this storm coming, and this wave was like, yeah, this is going to take everybody, out of their seats. Now, the coming back to the office, that I honestly, again, this is another transition that could be a reason to be out of balance again, or could be a great excuse to, I'm going to get my stuff together and I'm going to really figure this out. And wise advisors and team managers and business owners will take this opportunity to say, okay, if we're coming back to the office, great. Or if we're staying at home, great. Or if we're doing some kind of combo, great. But here's some parameters so that we're balanced. So good question, man.
Yeah, I asked you that because I feel like in my own network of friends and even coworkers, the first 6 months or so, it was very hard for you to really be able to disconnect, right? It's like you're at home, you're there all day. And typically it's like you leave the office and it's like, okay, I'm done. But it was really hard for people to find this balance around, I'm done. And like, I'm not working like 10 hours a day, So super intrigued to see what your kind of feedback has been on specifically advisors regarding this.
Yeah, it's so right on, because you have a physical barrier where you leave the office, but now with, again, cell phones, laptops, being connected with your clients, with email and everything, like it's just there. But it's almost now, because of that initial shift to home, that there is a more justifiable excuse, right, to be more connected. But it's really a stress, it's a fear and stress related psychological issue that I found most of the time. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Well, cool. I appreciate you asking that and being such a great guest. I want to give you some time to talk about how you help advisors to be more balanced. And I honestly, just listening to your answers and even your insightful questions, it leads me to believe that you're a pretty balanced guy. Like you've got a lot of this figured out, and you've helped your team do that, which is so important because that affects so many people, right? It affects dozens of lives. But how do you help advisors? Because one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons why I want you on this podcast today, is I see how your service can help them have better balance at work, right? I'm always trying to help them be more productive and use their time, to their best ability so that they can have time outside of work. Like those things go hand in hand. That is the make time method. So that in mind, tell us a little bit more about how Trust and Will, came about and how it helps advisors to, really have more balance in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trust and Will has been around almost for about 4 years. We started here in San Diego. And it really comes down to two of our co-founders back in the day were in that stage in life of, looking to get married, start thinking about growing a family. And they really looked at the industry and said, great, like we should be responsible adults as we're going to become parents and like set up an estate plan. And they started looking at like options. And they were like, I don't have a complex need for me to pay a San Diego attorney $3,000 right after I got married for an estate plan. Like I'm not even a homeowner yet, very basic. And that entrepreneur kind of insight came in and said, there's a huge need here. And long story short, they launched a company. We're now live nationwide. We've helped a little bit of over 240,000 families nationwide. And the mission around helping families just have an easier, more accessible way for estate planning, that's the mission that drives us forward every day. And then most advisors actually don't know this, but we never really intended to serve advisors. Like the business plan was like direct to consumer. And as we started to really build a really good reputation, a really good brand, clients would go back to their advisor and say, look, I got my estate plan done with Trust and Will. And advisors were like, who's this company? So long story short, we've actually built a product specifically for advisors. And what the product actually does, it's a unique dashboard that really helps the advisor educate their clients around estate planning. So one, when it comes to balance, we don't want an advisor, especially if you're independent, spending your resources writing about estate planning. We do that for you. We have a full team on the marketing side that's creating really solid content to help educate your clients around estate planning. Two, it's helping save time by providing an easy to use link that you can introduce your clients to Trust and Will. So it's providing just another option for the advisor that might have a client that doesn't have very complex needs. And then from there, Travis, what it does, the technology behind it, once a client actually gets started, it keeps the advisor connected. And advisors love this. It adds touch points. And a lot of times the feedback that we get is I refer clients to an attorney. If they do go through the process, they don't know if the attorney reached out, if they've actually started the process, if they finished the process, they feel kind of left out. And what we've done with our platform is really making sure that the advisor's in the center of that process. So they get notified when the client starts, when they finish. If they actually need to request documents, they can request to see the actual documents that they completed via Trust and Will. So it's really one, being able to empower the advisor to be more proactive around estate planning. And then two, biggest thing, and especially we're about to go through one of the biggest generational wealth transfers in the history that we've ever seen. And it's really helping that advisor have that conversation with their clients. Not about returns, not about asset allocation, but Travis, what is important? Like, what does your wealth mean to you? Who do you care about? What are you passionate about? Who do you want to leave this to? And it's a totally different conversation that you're able to have with your clients. And there's a statistic out there that typically in the history, once a client passes, 90% of the time, those assets leave that book of business, leave that advisor. So how as an advisor can we have deeper conversations that we feel that we're more connected to the people that are really important to your clients, kids, whatever it might be, whatever their situation is, to really understand outside of money and retirement age and vacation goals, who do they really care about? What are they passionate about? What are some charities? And that's a conversation that I think is one of the deeper conversations that an advisor can have to really deepen your relationship. And then in return, your client's completing an estate plan. No one's ever said, oh, I regret creating my estate plan. Most of the time, it's the peace of mind that I've actually added to myself, to my kids that aren't 18 yet, that I know they're going to be taken care of if something happens. Because I think from a human perspective, we dread that conversation. We don't like talking about death. We don't want to face it, right? But we haven't found a way to stay alive forever, right? So we're all going to die. It's just a matter of when. And a lot of times we feel that, man, I'm young, I'm healthy, but life happens. So the feedback that we get all the time from advisors and their clients, it's just that peace of mind. You feel so much better about actually completing it.
Well, there's some things here that I really love. Number one, this conversation is really all about the wealth transfer versus, wealth building and creation, which it is an absolutely a totally different conversation. And obviously you begin with the end in mind, and good advisors will always do that. But here, what I love about this is that the advisors are staying connected. And I don't have to be the guy that goes with the client to that appointment every time and walks them through that process. I mean, I've done that for a couple of my clients. I did as an advisor. But if I did that for every single client I ever had, I would never do planning. Like it wouldn't happen. So having this touch point and that, that dashboard for advisors, for me, that's huge. Like that, I would be all over that if I was an advisor. But also what you brought up is so very true. The majority, once, a client passes away, the assets leave the advisor, and they might leave the advisor for many reasons, because they go to the child or they go to a spouse and the spouse doesn't like the advisor, or, that relationship isn't really there. So you really speak to me there. And a lot of advisors who are in it for the relationship, that they need to keep that relationship as they're helping, move to the next generation. So I really appreciate this, Andre. If advisors want to get in touch with you, what's the best website for them to go to? How do they get in touch with, you and continue this conversation, or try out your dashboard and see how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Best way is trustandwill.com/advisors. And from there, you can actually schedule a demo with someone on our team. And that's something that we're very passionate about as well, Travis, is really building trust with an advisor to make sure, one, this is going to be the right fit for what they're looking for. And then two, that they have a point of contact. So that's something that we've done, not just on the advisor side, but also on the consumer side, is really providing a high level of support. We want to build trust. We want to make sure it's the right fit. And then personally, just LinkedIn and Twitter, just Andres Mazabel. Happy to connect. I'm super passionate. I always love hearing about, how can we better serve advisors? And it's what I've loved about this product that we built. It's been all based on advisor feedback, which is awesome. It's so cool to be at a company that we can get feedback directly from folks that are using the product and built it around that. So always happy to connect with folks that are, implemented estate planning, or just want to learn a little bit more about the pain points that we're helping solve.
Love it. I've been to your website. I know wills start at like $90, like $89. It's silly, but probably 90% of my clients didn't even have a will. Like a trust, we can get into the differences here, but a trust is really great for, the estate planning and building out the, the recommendations there and protection, asset protection. But really, here's an issue with most clients that I saw as an advisor, didn't even have a will. Getting that, as easy as $90. for direct to consumer. But for advisors, I love what you're doing here to connect. Definitely get on there, schedule a demo. There's some great testimonials here on the website that I'm seeing where you can just play around with it and see what it's like to work with Trust and Will. Definitely reach out to you guys. You're the only one that I know that is doing this. Maybe there's others out there doing it. I don't know, but I love what you're doing. And I love that you're providing this service to advisors in such a easy to use format that doesn't create a bunch of cumbersome extra, trainings, day long, you got to use this, but really just straight up right there in your dashboard and get to use it. So I know I have to update my will because we moved from Texas to Utah. So I'm jumping on the website, trustandwill.com, and I'm going to be doing that very soon. So thank you, Andres, for being a guest on the show and for sharing your wisdom, man. Anything else you'd like to wrap up with? Any other things you'd like to mention to advisors on achieving balance with using your company?
That's really it, Travis. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate, as I mentioned, how you're helping advisors find more balance. This is definitely a tool that saves time, streamlines what's typically a very time-consuming process for both the advisor and for the client. So definitely check us out. It's, really, I love working with very forward-thinking advisors that are saying, how can I streamline my practice? How can I provide a better consumer experience for my clients that's modern, that feels like what consumers are looking for? See, because Amazon, Uber, all those companies have changed the way what we expect out of how we do business. And financial planning's starting to evolve. It's a little bit behind, obviously, but we're one of the pioneers in really helping streamline one of the oldest industries, which is estate planning. So super fortunate to be part of the movement. And we definitely have seen and keep hearing feedback from advisors every day on the impact that it has, not just on them, but on their clients.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Andres. I appreciate you being here again. Enjoy your sunny day in California, and we'll be talking with you soon. Thanks, everybody, for joining the podcast. Make sure to check out trustandwill.com/advisors for a free demo. And if you haven't picked up the book, Achieving Balance, go to achievingbalancebook.com. Pick that up today. So much of what we talked about is really planted in there already. So thanks again, my friend. And thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it.